My name is Lauren. I'm an MLIS grad student and the Student Advocacy President at San Jose State University. I, like many other students, have been watching the world respond to the issue that severely impacts the industry that many students like myself are hoping to enter. Admittedly, it looks pretty bleak. That's why I decided to put out a call to get the perspective of real-life experienced librarians today, to hear their side of the story. Even though
an angry guy called me, but it was really funny.
Full voice. I'm like, I thought it was the same thing.
Not a single person.
Yeah, exactly. This is good. This is a good time to graduate now. Yeah, that's so cool. Well, thanks for letting me know.
What I say is, have them read the book.
Today we're going to meet JoAnne. She's a retired teacher librarian from Maryland, and she's here to tell us her perspective of what she's seen over the years and what she thinks may be coming. I was speaking to the public library manager I was talking to the other day was saying a lot of people do support libraries from both sides. It's just finding that middle ground to talk about without getting sensationalist.
Right.
And falling into the talking points that can usually not end up going anywhere productive. An issue that we have here that I think is pretty nationwide probably is misinformation about what is the subject material. For example, if a family is hesitant about letting their kids have LGBTQ related books,
right,
that may be one matter altogether. But then there can be certain groups that will exaggerate and say, and this book has explicit content in it or something like that, which isn't true. So then it balloons out of fear, and that's where it becomes a big issue.
Same deal happens on the East Coast too. So I think that, and then what's the other one? The critical race theory. I think those are the two real trigger points that everybody's just screaming at one another about. And I have to take a step back because I thought I don't know enough to respond to what the real issue is, because with agendas, they've taken the one little statement and that has become everything, where you don't really see it in perspective where it really belongs, to say, okay, this is making some sense. It still is a little out there, but now I understand what you were thinking. And I think, with the questions that you gave me, one of the pieces is that's part, I think, of what we're struggling with it. We're just so diametrically opposed, everybody screaming at one another, where I think the conversation would be really, really good for folks. They've always, and I started, my library degree was 1973, so that's how old I am. And then after that was just a master's in library science. And then a couple of years later, I got my certification to move into school libraries. But some of the same kinds of things were still issues then. And I think what's happened is issues that were just there have become very exacerbated because of social media, because everything now is in your face all the time. And I think sometimes we've lost our collective minds. Want me to give you just a little story of my 40 years of how really little book issues were? And it's really very funny. So I started working in my college library when I got my master's, and realized that as much as I love my college, that library experience was I was a cataloger. I was with a bunch of old ladies and a typewriter. And I thought I liked all of library work. I didn't want to get pigeonholed into just that one thing. So I looked around and go, okay, so what kind of a library job allows you to do all those things that I took classes in? That was schools. I wasn't certified. Private schools didn't require certification. So I started for a couple of years in a private school, got my certification. And then when I moved to Maryland, I was 40 years in one of the county systems here, mainly high school, 5 or 6 years in a middle school. So my experience are the bigger kids, not the little guys. But what was so very interesting, this was a county, large county, and it was sort of nice because there was the library office, there were rules and regulations for all of us librarians. So you sort of had, a guide as to what you were supposed to be doing, because no one knew what we did. When I started, we had to explain why librarians were important in a school. 40 years later, we were still trying to justify why we existed. So that alone just blew me away. It's like we're probably one of the few professions that we're trying to explain to people 40 years later why you need us. And they still don't get it. But I still remember one of the first days in there, first thing was, we're not allowed to have the book by Judy Blume forever. Could not be in our libraries. And I thought, okay, don't even know what that book is. Let me read it. Because of course, a banned book you read. And all I kept thinking is, all right, so Public library has it. And that's one of the things that I've always would look at. If I didn't think it was quite appropriate for a school, when I knew the public library system had it, I thought, well, then at least the kids can get what they want. We're just not allowed to be doing that. And it's very, very different. Public schools really are what we follow curriculum. So ours is a little bit more narrow. But that was the first experience I had with, you can't have this book. Well, I have to read it to know why I can't have it. Okay,
Yeah.
if you say so. The next thing is, this is that was the middle school. And I had another experience in that middle school. Somebody had just donated a bunch of paperbacks. I didn't have time to read them all. And they were out there. And I remember the principal calling me in one day. He had a book and he said, this came from one of our young ladies. I think it was a ninth grader. And he said, have you read this? I said, no. He opened up the page and we started reading. It's like, oh, I guess that shouldn't be there. It was definitely age inappropriate, nothing to be banned, but I'm sure probably like somebody's aunt had given these books to the library. So it was one of those things that it was just pretty funny, but you realize that in the kinds of schools I've worked in, parents aren't paying a lot of attention to what kids are reading. This, I guess her mom must have read it too. And that's when it's like, I don't think this is appropriate. That was my first school, those two experiences, but it just helped me learn a little bit about how important selecting books is. And I know we had a whole class on book selection. And that was when I realized there is a lot of value to it. And especially as far as schools go, because you're trying to support curriculum. When we bought books, and this is, again, 5 carbon copies, type up your book list, and you had to have 2 reviews. And at the time, there was book list and school library journal. And that's what we went through. Read the reviews. If it looked like it matched, you filled in these little cards, and then you put the cards together based on how much money you had. So we always picked books, had to have 2 reviews. Then it went to our central office. They looked at our orders. They could question if they wanted. So I felt like it was really hard to screw up. Now, there were no credit cards. We weren't allowed to buy anything outside of county money through this process. So it was very controlled. And at that point, I guess they did have the right to say, we have limited funds. You need to stay within these parameters. And then when I went to my next school, it was a middle high combined. So it was grade 7 through 12, which was a really interesting situation because you have 18-year-olds and you also have 12 and 13-year-olds all in the same library, access to the same materials. So that became a little bit of a challenge because of appropriateness for whatever level. And oh my God, one of my favorite stories from there, his name was Ronnie. He was a 7th grader. And all I know is the administrator for the 7th graders brought this book into me during one of the lunch shifts, plopped it on my desk. He was the middle school administrator. He said, my kids can't read this book. Don't let them sign it out. Well, this stupid little child had the book in the cafeteria. It was Go Ask Alice, and he was showing everybody the F word. Hadn't read the book, didn't even know what else was in there, but that word. And the administrator, same thing, saw that word, plopped it down. And I just looked and I thought, I'm really sorry that you feel that way because there's so much worth to reading this book. And I just put it in my back collection because I had some things that I thought kids know to ask. And that's where I kept it. And I thought, and if you have an 8th grader, I'll give it to an 8th grader. You don't count. But so that was the other thing, that there were people who just react to a word or one little scene. So that was the actual only issue I ever had there. And I was there for 5 years, and that was the 7 through 12. But I think as librarians, we get to know our collection. We get to know our community of readers and users. And kids usually, some know what they want, but a lot of them are always looking for suggestions. And I think that's one of the roles that we always need to do and continue to do well is know our kids, or know our public, if it's a public library, and know how to match things up or how to do that little interview with them. Like, what do you really mean when you ask me that? What kinds of stuff do you really like? Would you like to try this? Or here are 2 things, pick one or read them both and tell me what you like. I also, at the last school where I spent 19 years, I had some kids that love to read. So when I was in doubt, like, I'm not so sure about this, I'd say, here, read this and tell me whether or not I should put it out in the library. So they love that kind of stuff because, I knew it had reviews and the reviews were okay, but I just wanted to be certain that they were not offended. They didn't think anybody else would be offended since they knew the community. So those are my fun kids. It's like, I need you to read this. And of course, they'd read it in one night because they were readers. But it was interesting there. I had one other issue, and it was the guys. It was a young man, and I want to say he may have been a 10th grader. Don't think he was an 11th grader. And that was when the manga collections were becoming really big. And it was very difficult to find reviews on them. And that's where I had kids constantly coming in, and I knew their content material could be, I'm going to say X-rated, not really, but out there. But I also knew I was very poor, low poverty, minimal education, parent wise kind of community. I mean, it was rough and tumble, but that's what the kids wanted. They knew the series. They would come and tell me, they give me a list of these things. I try to find reviews. I try to do the best I can, but the kids were always reading those things. So I couldn't even tell you what the series was I had. And one day the principal came down to me and said, Mrs. So-and-so does not want her son signing anything out from there. And I think she must have showed me the picture, the pointy little breasts, like in the pencil drawings. It's like, oh my God, okay, whatever. Mom doesn't want it. That's fine. You've told your son that's what it needs to be. So the kid would come in at lunchtime and he'd go over to that section, had a conversation saying, your mom said you can't be in this section. You can't read these books. Not my rules. That's what your mom has asked of you. You have to do what your mom says. Months later, the principal came down with a bag full of books and she said, he wasn't supposed to have these. Well, I looked at them and I said, just give me a second, put them through my circulation system. And I said, his mom's got a worse problem than just him having these. He stole them all. So it's like when the parents say no, a 10th grade boy who wants to be into these things, so now he steals them. Don't ask me when he showed up, because I was the only one in there. That was my other little experience with the parents that banned the book from the student. But I thought, I don't know what to say. I'm not there 24/7 watching everything every kid did. But literally in my 40 years, those were the only little situations that I ever had. Maybe different communities had some issues because within my county, we went from very wealthy, well-educated to barely surviving within the 200 and some schools. Every single part of the county was uniquely different. We could come from very rural areas to very urban areas within the county. Like I said, book selection, you really need to know your communities and what it is they want, because what would work for mine, somebody else might go, oh my God, I would never put that in my library. My parents would this, my parents would that, even if all the reviews were in place for us. The other thing that became very interesting as time went on, again, we always had to have 2 reviews, or most of the time we did. And then once automation came in, my experience in the last however many years, I'm not even sure what we use for a circ system anymore, but we eventually moved over into Follett as the circulation system. And then Follett was also a book jobber. So they had on their circulation system and their book sale system, they had all the reviews posted. So we just went to that, and it was so much easier than trying to find magazines, because they would have the school library journal, book list, they might have Kirkus, they had a lot more journals that you could begin to see. So it became a very easy process of ordering books because all of the reviews were there. So even to my very last day in the building, we were still 2 reviews, still going, that same process. So that didn't stop. I talked to a woman who worked in the elementary schools in the county where I live, not work. And she said at this county's elementary level, they really didn't venture out on their own and buy books, that they were really curated by like the elementary school office or library office. It's like, this is what all elementary libraries are supposed to have. This is what you have. So that was a little different experience. I don't know in the system I worked, if that's how the elementary schools were treated. I don't think so. I think it's just a different way that the counties have done their book selection over the years. So like I said, I think because of the kind of county we are and the kinds of schools I worked in, if I had issues, it was the parents didn't want their kids reading. The kids would take out books and keep them in their locker because they would tell me when they would go home, parents would make fun of them reading, go, we should put your damn book down and come down and watch television like the rest of us. So that was a real eye-opener. Parents didn't care. And in some ways, that was a kind of nice school because you didn't have to deal with parents. You just had to deal with kids. You could deal with kids. So like I said, it's all very, very interesting, the different experiences of those times. Now, all I can tell you is as I was leaving the system and realized so much now was all internet based, all the databases, all that kind of stuff, it began to change. And kids, the reading wasn't as important. It was, can I Google it? Can I find it this way? Can I copy paste? Can I read a book review and just turn that in kind of stuff? So I don't know, like right now, if I went back into any of these school buildings, if reading is even up there the way it used to be, or is there just more information consumption, but they're just barely getting by. I don't know what that looks like. But like I said, I have not seen anything different. And most of the people that I still hang out with that are retired like me, we really didn't experience it much. And it could have been the county system that we were in tended to be more liberal. So we didn't have a lot of that kind of thing. I just fortunately never really experienced, but I also think that book selection piece, especially from a school point of view, since you're supporting curriculum for a librarian at that level, you got to know your teachers, you got to know the curriculum, you got to know the kind of community and kids you have, and then you're usually pretty safe if you make good ordering decisions.
That is something that I've heard current teacher librarians talk about. Like a relatively new teacher librarian that I was talking to, they were saying that a talking point now is like students' rights versus parents' rights, right? And so I'm not going to monitor what your kid is reading. That is your decision to talk to them at home and to say, this is what I would not like you to read, or this is what's appropriate for our family, etc. is a like personal decision. But I'm not going to give you a list of what they're reading. So at least that's what some teacher librarians are trying to do. But obviously that can also lead to issues too. So it's a big question, I guess, right now.
And like I told you, the story of the young man who stole the books, that came from his parents. And to me, that's the case. I bought things that had value to the curriculum, to what kids needed to be. And I always would balance. If I had this kind of genre, I tried different kinds of authors so that no matter who you were, you had something for you. I mean, when you could find things like that. But it was interesting. I stopped by the public library because in conversation, we were talking about schools knowing what should be in there, and it really does support curriculum and parents have some involvement. But I thought, how old can a kid be to go into a public library and sign out a book? Thinking about all these things in there. And I'm thinking, well, no 3-year-old would wander in a public library without a parent. And then I thought, well, would an 8-year-old or is it 12-year-old, do they even have a rule? I never thought to ask. So I stopped in the other day and said, just a curiosity question. And she said, anybody can sign out any book at any age. And she said, that's on the home. And she said, that's just the way we look at it. Whether you come in with a parent or you come in as a middle schooler because you rode your bike here, it comes from the home, what they view appropriate or inappropriate. So that goes exactly with what you're saying. And I think that it has to be that way. We had a group in one of the schools I worked in that, thank goodness they read, but they had this religion, and anything that got plugged in, they could not use. So if a teacher was showing a movie, or they had to leave the room. Fortunately, that was before there were ebooks or anything and that kids were reading books. But I thought that was their belief. So whenever something would be done, that's how I knew about it, because they come to the library with an alternative assignment. So public schools have always attempted to work around some of the values. I mean, some of them are so outlandish, like, no public school can do this. You really need to homeschool or develop your own kind of community school, because this is not going to happen. That was one of the things that I just realized, it really has to come from the home. But no, that seems to be pretty much what everybody's attempting to do. And again, so when you have a whole community that's up in arms over the curriculum, I don't know what you do when this whole segment of the county says, no, we're not. And the rest of them go, and I had a great quote, and I think it was actually for librarians trying to figure out how to curate appropriate books. And one of the things says, does this offend my personal values? Is it okay to impose my values on everyone else? And I think that was one of the pieces that I always had to be careful of, because I knew how I grew up, and I knew some things like, oh my God, that's shocking. What? And then I thought, no, that's my personal value. I'm looking around at this community where I'm working. So I had a young lady in my book club. It was a book club meeting. Don't ask me how we got talking, but it was back when 50 Shades of Grey came out. And she said to the group, yeah, my mom and I read the book and went to the movies to see it together. I'm going, now I'd read the book and seen the movies, but I'm thinking, you're 14, but you went with your mom. Yeah. I can't judge your home value. I mean, but it was another eye opener where I don't even know what goes on and what these kids are exposed to and what's okay in their world. And when I saw that about, imposing my own values on others, it's like, I would not even begin to think about doing that. But like I said, so that was another lesson I learned. Like, I'm speechless, folks. When that book came out, that was the last thing I remember ever causing problems in our public library system here, because there were a lot of furious people about spending their tax money to buy that trash for the library. And the library very graciously, very gently stood their ground and the books went in. So,
Mhm.
so watching that, because it says, here's the list, it checks off all the things that we do, it's acceptable. I think that was the only really big one for Maryland library systems.
A current talking point right now as well in school libraries is books that involve any sort of sex education component. And kind of like what you're saying, it's very difficult to keep people from finding anything on the internet now.
Right.
And the thing that's to me is like confusing is, wouldn't you rather them come across age appropriate sex education materials versus anything else that they could
Right.
find by accident on the internet?
Absolutely 100% agree with you, which sometimes I wonder, what are the parents afraid of? What are they seeing? Are they that oblivious to what their kids are really doing? And sometimes I think they are. I mean, I have two grown sons, and sometimes you think you know what they're doing, but kids are
Yeah.
kids. And when they're out of your sight with their friends, this was way before there were cell phones and everything else. And if you think back to when you were that age, you could find stuff or have friends that could do
Yeah.
things and your parents didn't know a lot. But no, I agree with you. I would rather it be put there by someone who looked at it and said, this is very factual. Here are two books you can pick from. They're both very appropriate. If you're not fond of this, here's another one. Here's some boys, here's some girls, here's whatever. And all I know is for high school, and I'm sure it's probably the same with middle school, for our English classes, especially when they had novels or books that were required reading, and that was going to be what they did for like 2 or 3 months. When there was a question about that from a parent, there always was a second selection that met all the same objectives and same kinds of stuff that then the kid could be given. So when that would happen in a classroom, they were prepared. Here are your choices. And to me, the library you'd think would be the same. I mean, here it is. I wish I understood parents.
I think that having a secondary selection, that sounds like a really smart thing to do. I don't know. I was homeschooled, for example, so I know what the homeschool community, it's pretty varied. Like you
Right.
get every type of person, every type of reason. When I hear people, whether they're just posturing or not, on social media be like, well, then I'm going to homeschool my kid. I'm like, well, for one thing, you don't know how involved that would be. But also, I have met people that have been very sheltered people. You don't know what they're going to be like when they hit college age, because such freedom is going to look very different on them than it would have if you hadn't been quite so narrow in what you allowed them to do.
And I was to say, my kids were homeschooled. One started at 4th grade and the other, I think, at 7th, but it was more for health issues. And that was my husband that did that, because it's like, there is no way I could. Oh, no, 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 no. So I know what you're saying about that's a real intense thing. Our homeschool communities have grown, especially since COVID. They grew, they pulled their resources together. Again, those are communities that were educated. They're not the communities that don't even have Wi-Fi access and had no way of doing their virtual schooling because they had nothing. They didn't have computers. But you're right. And parents can't protect their kids forever. So I admire them for trying, but it's like, oh, what are you going to raise? Because at some point that door is going to open, and they've had no guidance as to how to deal with all of that.
There's a trope that exists, really, like, it's a fictional trope, but it's called like born sexy yesterday, and it just means like now this like doll entering the world because you don't know anything. It's like you were born yesterday, and it's like you're just more likely to fall prey to any of the things parents were worried about, because you're like, you don't know anything, like, you know.
If there were conversations about it, if there was some experiences.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, a little bit different note when we talk about book banning and all. I read one book and then I saw a couple articles since that one. We talk about banning books, but with all the social media stuff, it's almost like authors are being canceled. I just finished Yellowface, and I don't know whether you're familiar with it, even though it has one theme of like she's plagiarized her best friend's work to try to pass herself off as Chinese. My takeaway through all of that craziness was just what social media did to her, because she was a writer in her own right. But when you saw they destroyed her, a few weeks later in one of our local papers, and I can't remember whether it was an article from the New York Times or where it originally appeared, was from a debut author. She was African American, very light skinned, at least from her picture. And she was accused of racial traitor, that kind of stuff. And before her book even got published, totally canceled by all the viciousness on social media. So I was thinking about it when I looked at these questions, and I thought it's one thing for a book that's already in your hands, but for some of these people, they're canceled before their word or their point of view or any is even out there. And that to me is really frightening. I have a new friend who just opened an indie bookstore during COVID. And I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Tiny little place. She started as a literacy lab for elementary kids, a lot of homeschool kids teaching reading. So it's not very big. She curates it just exquisitely, and she tries to put in, if you walk in my store, you will be represented. And she did a really cool little article in her newsletter about, so what do I do all day? How do I get my books? And some of the things she started immediately is the TikTok, the book talk. I look at this, I follow this person, and then that person is like, this is all just social media craziness before you then start getting to reasonable sources. And I just thought, that's, to me, should be even another question about, let's talk about book banning, but let's talk about the books that don't even get written because somebody got ticked off, and the viciousness of truth, not truth is all out there. And what's that going to look like for our reading purposes? Are we not going to get materials because who wants to put themselves through this? And if you have been a successful author, how did you get past all the vitriol that could be out there, especially when you tackle some tough subjects? So, but like I said, that popped up as I was reading that. And then I looked about book banning. I thought, these are examples of authors being silenced right out of the starting gate.
Yeah, and it's already so hard to get published. I mean, or like I think of, because we've been talking about school libraries, I think for a lot of people, middle grade and up is their introduction to reading, into that as a habit, potentially. When stuff is made unavailable that maybe they would have been interested in or see themselves represented, or like even when I was younger and my brother read almost exclusively graphic novels and comics, I thought that doesn't count as reading. And now my opinion would be different. But when you continue to be like, oh, you're not even reading or whatever, like you could keep somebody from actually developing a habit. We know that people have not been reading as much, although the pandemic has kind of pushed more people into that habit again, which is an interesting positive of it. I know some people just don't want to look at the way the world looks now. Some parents are concerned about gender identity and all of the different things. But libraries have tons of options. When you focus on these few options you don't like, for one thing, you might make that option seem more attractive to your kids.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What is it? If your parents said no, what are you going to do? I'm going to go do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wasn't allowed to read certain fantasy books growing up, and that just made fantasy way more interesting to me. Like Aragon and stuff like that. Just because of, and Harry Potter, because there are all kinds of rumors about that back then.
Because that was one of them that we read them as a family. We read aloud until the kids got old enough. We fought over who's the faster reader going to get through the new book first. And when I found that people were banning that, it's like, oh my God, it's exquisite writing, her vocabulary. What? And when they said magic, that is so secondary to the character story.
Yeah.
I guess I don't get it. To me, if you want to read it, knock yourself out. I don't care what it is. Doesn't mean I have to read it. And for someone to want to impose what they think is best for me, and you see that in a lot of things in life, that everybody knows better than I do what I need. No, not really. If I want my red wine, I'm sorry, I'm drinking my red wine. Yes, I'll die. We all die. But yeah, it really is very, very interesting. But I was going to say, one of the things, and I don't know how the public library does it. I know in a school library, at least at the secondary level, when kids would be in, my job was always to make sure the kid knew I knew that they were there and engaged. What do they need? Because they never knew what they needed. So they'd wander around. So I always had that interaction with them. One of the things, and I did say this to Michelle, I said, one of the downsides of the public libraries I've been in is everybody's behind a desk. You can go to them, but no one is out there just sort of wandering around. And that's where I could tell when they were just wandering around in a school library. And I said, so what are you looking for? Well, I don't know. I need something for, and that to me was how you engage a reader. You give them a couple choices. And I said to her, if there's one comment I'd make about the public library is they don't engage outside of that little information sign with their customers, with their guests. And I said, and to me, you don't even know. I walk into a public library with 40 some years and a master's plus 60. And I don't want to say petrified. I am very uncomfortable because I don't know my way around their system. I can find books, and I finally figured out what all the catalogs are for because they all had little different things. But beyond that, I still, a lot is like, you can do what and how do you do that? Because if you don't go and ask, there's nobody just casually or someone casually saying, well, here's the section and there's some stuff here and some over there. So the kids see something other, or adults see something other than what they know. And maybe that would get around some of the, what is it they said in Library of Congress, the most banned or questioned section of the HQ books. And they're all about sex and family. And I thought, oh my God. And that's what we just talked about. It's those are the topics that most people are upset about. So that's Library of Congress. It's like, oh my God, I forgot about Library of Congress.
I've taken like a user experience class recently, and it has caused me to think about user experience. It involves every aspect of the way you engage with a library or any business, from the website to any materials to parking to the way you engage. It all of it is part of your experience as a user, customer, whatever term you want to use. I think that they kind of err on the side of we don't want to bother people. The other side of it is like, I can't remember the last time I've talked to a librarian, kind of a thing. Like, and that's kind of like, yeah. I mean, I know they're there, but unless you are the one doing the pursuing in that way or whatever, it doesn't happen. And so it's just an interesting side of it, because you go, I know that some people don't want to be bothered. At the same time, there are some people that have, I don't know if library anxiety is the right term, but like, you're just like, there's a lot here. I'm not really sure where to start.
And I was going to say, and it's a secret how the books are on the shelves, because we know we've been trained, but if you just walk in, so the county library where I am, I forget what book I was trying to find, and it was a YA book. Found it in the catalog. I knew the author. I mean, I know how to go to the shelf. I couldn't find that darn thing for anything, and it said it was in. So I went over to the desk and inquired about it, and she said, well, what neighborhood is it in? What are you talking about? Well, they call genres neighborhoods. Is it horror? Is it science fiction? I don't know. It doesn't tell me that in the catalog. So they had their own neighborhoods, and you had to guess what neighborhood it was in. So I said, so how do you decide between, I forget what it was, fantasy and something else? And she said, it just depends who's got the book and what they decide. Oh, great.
Oh, wow.
So those are some of the things, like, I had to come ask, because I gave every system I could possibly think of a shot at. Neighborhoods, would never have guessed that was a term, and no rhyme or reason why one might be here or one might be there, because I thought this was science fiction. No, yes, and I know it's also okay. So those are the kinds of things that does make me chuckle.
We have talked about like how we can go away from some of the heavier language that users wouldn't use. Like they would say, I want to find books. Maybe they wouldn't think, I want to look at the catalog, or whatever the phrase might be. So I guess the downside of that, or the flip side of that, is then adding even more terminology that they wouldn't know to look for. Unless it's signed very obviously somewhere, or I don't know.
Right. So when I first moved here, there was not a card catalog. They were book catalogs. And they were just sort of scattered. One might say subject, one might say author, one might say title. Then you'd have all the paperback ones that were supplements for this couple months. It's like, oh my God, just shoot me. I'm thinking, again, I have a background in this world, and I think I can understand how to do this, but I don't know what the average person did, but I still remember a book catalog. Oh, goodness. And the other thing that we didn't really talk about, but one of the things with your questions was like, if there's a challenge or a ban, the nice thing for schools anyway, there's such a layer of bureaucracy that you could come and complain to me, and I'd say, oh, but wait, there's a form. Oh, but wait, we need to go to the principal's office to get the form and meet the principal, and you can start with them. In the county I live in, when I looked it up before I talked to you, there's 15 steps you have to go through. And one of them is the parent has to have read the book, and they have to be very specific what the problem is. And 9 times out of 10, the AP who took Go Ask Alice away from the kid, all he saw was the F word. never read the book, knew nothing about it. A lot of times that's what you'll get. Just, I heard where my son complained about, and it goes at the school level. And then if that's not satisfactory, they bump it up through the chain of command up to the county level. So, I mean, it can take months, and you only get to complain once about the book in the school year, or like the same person. If you don't like what they say, too bad. You've taken it to the top level. It just is what it is. That's always been around. And like, so for me as a school librarian, I would just have to facilitate that process starting. I'm really not a player in how it moves up the ladder. It's all written, all scripted, and who the characters in this play are. And that's always been in place. So that does take some pressure off of the individual school librarians for that. And I'm going to call them that crazy parent.
So I've talked to a few people that have engaged with those more recent challenges and stuff, and that sometimes it can become a big frenzy of emails or calls and such. It's good to know what is the process in place, because that's supposed to protect you from that. But some of it is just not logic based. So
no. This day and age, for at least the last 4 or 5 years, we just live in an emotional world. Everything is responded to emotionally, and it's so frustrating. I have to tell you, during the pandemic, I actually, for the very first time, read 1984. I promised myself, again, because I'm old, that I was going to read it before 1984 happened, and 1984 came and went. And I thought, all right, let me just read this during the pandemic. And that was a bad thing and a good thing, because you had to read it through the lenses of the pandemic. But it just resonated so much today. Like, we are happily giving over everything that makes us our own person. For all this big brother watching, oh, push my cell phone, let me get the ring, let me have everything that everybody can watch what I'm doing. And I'm really too lazy. So if you want to do that for me, and I just think this is more of it. Let's just shed our responsibility for everything. I don't want to do it. And I just thought, I don't know what we're doing as a society. I'm glad I'm old. I wish you all the luck, because I'm thinking, trying to navigate some of the really crazy stuff that's coming out. Or on the other hand, is it because I've seen it be so different that I can walk through history, and as it changes, where what you see is all you've seen and don't know how it got here. And I always say, does the pendulum really swing? And what happens when everything now is electronic? You don't even know what's what. And you look at all the AI and the chat GPT. So I had a massage today, and I was saying to the guy, he said, before long, they could probably have, that the table will do its own massage. I said, and you could be an AI character that comes in. And I mean, it really could be the wave of the future.
Yeah. It is very easy to have immediate gratification for things, for example, or have somebody else digest opinions for you, etc. Right. And then you are upset on behalf of something that you didn't fully look into, or happy, and you didn't check to see if that was true. Or part of it is we just have so much information all the time that it's hard to fully devote our attention to any of it.
And that's one of the things, growing up, when you finally had a TV, there were just a couple channels, they went off air. So everything was parceled in small bits and pieces. And then when I think cable, when it was 24/7, you had to fill it with stuff. And I think that was the beginning of the craziness, because you just filled it with things that would attract people to your station over somebody else's. And I think that's how we're just now used to just entertain me. News is entertaining. That's really not what news used to be. No one reads a paper. Papers are going out. Where can you find that voice or that podcast or that whatever, where you're getting the facts, not the opinion? And most people don't have the time of day. I just noticed since I've retired, I have far more time to try to consume or look for places to find that stuff. And as a librarian, every day, the first thing I did, skim the paper. I needed to know what was out there when the magazines would come in, look to see news-wise what was there, because I needed information first. When the kids came in, I could start directing them. So I was used to gaining news, but now you just throw up your hands, not even knowing what is news, what's just somebody, banging their lips together. And that's what you've seen.
I was a journalism minor. Like, I did English and journalism like 5 years ago when I was in my undergrad program. Trump was in presidency. He was saying that journalists are the enemy and stuff. So I remember being there, sitting in class, and we're like, well, this is great. This is good. This is a good time to graduate now. And going to apply for work and fellowships. And papers are just folding everywhere and magazines are disappearing,
Right.
and you're like, okay. But at the same, I mean, Chat GPT, for example, or AI, like I think it's a great resource, but it's an aggregator. It's not intelligent. It's like it skims and puts stuff together, but it did not intelligently think. The facts may be totally inaccurate, for example, and the sources are probably not real. So there's a way for it to go for it to be a fully useful thing. But
Oh, sure.
it doesn't mean that people aren't going to try to use it and not pay people to do stuff too. So
Right,
uh,
right.
yeah, because I mean I'm also a copywriter, and so I've seen people try to hire writers to fill their machine and pay them like $20 for it, and you're like, why would I? So that you can get free work? I don't understand. Yeah, it's a weird world we live in for sure.
I mean, part of it, if you can be an observer and watch, there's sometimes it just, my head wants to explode. And I mean, I even have friends that have zero intellectual curiosity. Their response to something would be, well, that's just stupid.
Mm.
Okay. That's my opinion. I feel this way, you feel this way. So that's just stupid. That's our conversation. Do you know how many years and degrees and credits we have between us? And that to me is one of the sadder things, to see well-educated people fall into that. You figure, middle America, the general masses, that might be more common, but so there are just times it just makes me crazy. So I just wander around talking to myself often or think things through. Or when I find that
Yeah.
person who really will have that conversation with me, whether we agree or not, I gain knowledge. As I say to folks, I'm not the same human today that I will be tomorrow, because every day I learn something, I rethink, I sort it through, and maybe I change a little bit, or maybe I think things differently. And I always try to see, and even with these book bans and all, I want to know what your thinking is. Help me understand how you got to that point, because it may help me then have a discussion with you, or it may actually make me see why you feel this way. And I get it if that really is your belief. And I had a conversation with a woman and I said, I'm playing devil's advocate. And I forget what they were hot button topics. And I said to her, but you know exactly how you feel. How about if I have that other side and feel just as strongly? Why do I have to be wrong? And I didn't mean to offend her. I mean, we're friends, we're in book club together. And I said, I'm playing devil's advocate, but I just want you to realize how people come at this. I understand and respect your opinions on things, but why does mine have to be wrong if I'm that person who has a total different point of view? And she got real quiet. I don't know whether that actually would penetrate it all. Not that she ever needs to change her point of view, but to realize where other people come from. Because sometimes I think she's a little out there, like, why are you going to every single protest? It's like, that's what you're doing in your retirement. But I respect the fact that these are values and issues that she feels deeply about. She's researched with, she's willing to stand up for it. But I just thought that was a very interesting reaction. So I always try to get how people come to their decisions or their thinking, because it really helps me, because I can be just as guilty of locking myself in my little world like I'm right. Why don't you have that dialogue, which we're not doing anymore? And again, I don't know about you, but I looked through a lot of the banned book lists and thought, oh, I've read so many of them off this list.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I don't like the word ban, because that takes me sort of back to the days of book burning and all. We haven't banned a book. If a book's published, it's published. To me, a ban means it is not published, it doesn't exist. To me, it's more books are being challenged. But I think we've used that term ban so often that it sounds so negative, but we still, all those books you don't want your kid reading, they're still out there. I can still get it. I can still read it. So I wish, like you were saying with vocabulary, I wish we had a better way of stating, and I like book challenges better, because if we want to start with it, I think what the Bible is the most banned book of any book ever written. So people would argue with that, going, well, nobody would ban the Bible. Well, they have. And it's the most challenged book. So we're not using the right word. To me, ban means it's all burned, it's gone, it's never happened. So when I was looking through the terminology, that's why I would write, challenged or words more along that line, because I just don't see it as banned. Ban means it's gone. It's not around. been wiped out.
We tend to use whatever the popular language
Right,
is, just
right.
so people understand what we're talking about. But I can see, I think some schools, like especially, I'd imagine school libraries where the poverty level is higher or such, is that maybe those students wouldn't go to a public library in their free time, or maybe they just were never introduced to a public library.
Right.
Like their family wasn't the type to bring them, or who knows, for a multitude of reasons. If certain books are kept from them while they're the age where they would read them potentially, then it's almost like that. Maybe it's not banned forever, but
Not
it's like
accessible. Yeah.
that door was closed
Right.
for them, and maybe they don't ever try to open it again. Yeah, so I know that's a concern. And for example, I've talked to like a trans librarian who was saying like they're most concerned about even the right for the parent to choose for the kids, because they know like it can be pretty complicated if you grew up in a home where your parents are very vocal against things that you may feel are a strong part of your identity, or don't even know, like you want that language to describe what's going on with you and your
Right,
being.
right. And I think one of the pieces with some of the themes that you're talking about too, it's that age appropriateness. And to me, those are conversations that elementary school kids can have given the right book, but it doesn't have to look exactly the same as maybe that middle and high school. It's certainly, because even regular books, as your body changes, you're looking at it. But if you tell an 8-year-old about what a 13-year-old is going to go through, an 8-year-old doesn't get all that stuff, but they may get pieces that are gentle movement into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of when even books that have, like, it could be a picture book where everyone is a anthropomorphized, like a cat person or something, and one of the cat characters could have two dads, and someone could want to ban that book,
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to tell you, one of my favorite people was Barney the dinosaur, because his song "I Love You, You Love Me" and I just remember, to me, he understood or put out there what families look like. And I just thought that was the goofiest whatever, but his presentation of families. Oh, so the caterpillar's in your family too. It was so accepting, so beautiful. And that's what I think my kids were the age that's why I watched it for about a year or two until they outgrew it. But I thought that representation of family is not necessarily defined the way we do it. And just, if you say family, look at my family, look how different we all are, even from different kinds of animals, not just necessarily humans. So I keep thinking, yeah, he got that one. But I'll tell you, when I started, again, back in the 70s, there was not much representation. One of the schools I worked in for 7 years was predominantly African American, and that would have been in the 90s. Let me tell you how hard it was just finding either African American writers or a story that had any African Americans in them. And they just weren't written. And I think that's the other piece too. So it's hard to represent when there's nothing there. And I think the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's a whole lot more representation with the LGBTQ. And to me, that's really healthy. I have a friend who lives down the street who has become New York Times bestseller YA. And her first 5 or 6 or 7 books, her characters are incredible. I love her writing, but I thought, these are all white people. But as she got a little further on, she has a handicapped child. She has the gay. She's got the characters are starting to come through, and they're written exquisitely. And you wouldn't even know at first, because that's not the main thing about the character. But I realized that's starting to happen where it never, ever was. So I feel really good. Again, that representation. Can you find it? Would you write about it?
Right.
And so back to the thing about, I don't want to see authors banned before they even write, through social media, just drag them down before anything even gets out there.
Yeah. And I think of, in a different way, of like librarians getting burned out from social media backlash, or like, we're just trying to think in a time where school librarians especially might be the ones that feel under attack. How can we support them or help people feel lifted up and part of a community? Because I know that school librarians, like, often you're working by yourself,
right?
You don't have librarians working with you. So like, how can we, as much as possible, back you guys up?
And within our county system, we would have meetings. So we would have elementary meetings, and then sometimes it would be elementary, then middle separate, and then high school. Sometimes it would be elementary and secondary. It would depend. And a lot of times that was when we would sort of get together with one another. because we didn't even know one another. I mean, we didn't know who worked in
Yeah.
a library except for these kinds of meetings. And you'd start to sort of find your person that you got along with, or was the library similar to yours? And literally, if I had questions, I had about 5 go-to librarians that I would call. So I think some of that, we found our people. We would get in trouble at all of our meetings because here's this agenda. We don't need some stupid agenda. We need to talk to one another because we have no one to talk to, like you said. It's this kind of everyday stuff. How do you handle this? What did you do about that? And then it got so bad, they even assigned us seats at some of our meetings. So we went with our friends. I mean, that's how poorly we were treated my last couple of years there. It's like, oh, good Lord, folks, we found our own network within our system. Now, if you were a standalone kind of library, I know when I was in the private school, I belonged to the independent school librarians and went to some of their conferences, again, trying to find where there are other voices like mine or other kinds of situations similar, and how can I talk to peers. But that would be one of the things that I would say. If you're like an independent school system, I don't know how that goes, but my guess is you can go online to somebody else's website that's another independent school system and call and say, find the librarian on the staff, and probably network that way. But that's one of the things that I would call my friend going, all right, am I crazy? Is this what I heard? What are you doing about this? And we all knew we could trust one another, because that was the other thing. There are a lot of people that would just, mouths never shut up, and it would go right back to the director and all. But that was what we did. We found our own people. And a lot of it was people we just liked and sort of hung out with even afterwards, but also people in similar kinds of schools, because we shared some things that other schools didn't. And when we talk about it, like the ones that are rich and famous, they had no idea what we were talking about. Like the kid comes to school, doesn't even have a place to live and no food, the same clothes all week. They don't even understand how we're in the same system. So that was the other thing we found. We found peers that were in similar kinds of schools. So we knew we shared similar concerns. And then we just found other people that were a lot of fun to hang out with and a little irreverent, where it was just sort of fun and it was more of a different kind of dialogue. But I would definitely say school librarians especially need to network. Once or twice I had another librarian with me. Most of the time, if I had any staff, it was more support staff, maybe a secretary or an aide. And they're not the people you can ask professional questions of. I mean, they may have some insight into kids and kid behavior because they've been around them so long, but you really did not have that professional. And the last place we'd ever called was the library office. Those people were just totally out of it. Not all of them, but towards the end, we would never even talk to them. They were just so political, trying to maintain their little status in the county hierarchy that, we were all hung out to dry. So I don't know whether that's similar or some, situations are sort of like that. The other thing, and one of the reasons I left is, I don't know what California is like, but in Maryland, we have heavy duty standardized tests. And they literally, my library my last couple of years was closed 2 to 3 months out of the year for testing. And I became this super proctor. And what was happening is you sort of knew when the standardized tests were coming in. I had my schedule, and literally by the end of September, my library calendar, because it was flexible scheduling in high school, it was booked till the end of the year. I mean, that's how well I worked with my teachers with their curriculum. It's booked. They knew when they wanted to do their research, where they'd fit it around things. They marked it. That's how they taught to get to the right spot at the right time. And then I could have one of the administrators who do testing pop in and go, oh, this year the ESOL testing is going to be on computer, so we're going to have to close you down these 2 weeks. Really? So then I said, well, then here are the names of the teachers. You can go up and tell them they cannot be here, because I'm not doing this anymore. But that became a thing. So teachers know how they have to protect themselves. And when you can no longer count on when the library was ever going to be ready, they couldn't plan. So they found other ways of researching and doing projects. They'd sign out laptops. They would do other things. And that's what I saw happening to the library world. And then the next big buzzword was makerspace. They wanted us all to be maker spaces. And I thought, I'm a high school. What are these kids going to come in and make in my space? They go to class, except for that 30 minutes at lunch. And usually they're coming and doing homework. Okay. And you want me to get rid of all my reference books because reference books are now bad? Oh, that's all very interesting too. And that was how many millions of dollars we have spent over the last 10 years that you gave us, but I have to get rid of them. It started to make no sense whatsoever. So between testing taking over the library, between they really didn't want us to have books, they wanted maker spaces, And then they did not want our books Dewey order. They wanted us to genreify. And if you had nonfiction on animals and fiction on animals, you were supposed to put them all together. And I thought,
Mm.
you know,
Wow.
and again, that was the system I worked in. But it
Mhm.
seems that that's the piece. I've talked with my public librarians on many occasions, and I would always say I'd watch to see what public libraries were doing because they really caught on to maker spaces right away, community libraries, community outreach. So the kinds of things that they offer, coffee with a cup, there might be a lawyer, there might be line dance. They have done so many cool things to bring in the public and to bring the
Yeah.
community into them. But that's a public library. You have lost your minds. A school library is instructional, it's curriculum, not a makerspace. So I'm supposed to buy puzzles and games and have them all over. I have no problem with that. But now don't tell me I'm supposed to now teach them how to do crafty things. No, no. So I don't know what other school systems look like. I don't know what California looks like. I just know here in this area, they were pushing the school libraries even to look like that. So it became very disheartening for school librarians. Or they also made you the tech coordinator. So you spent your entire day troubleshooting people's computers and tech issues. And you never even saw a kid in the library because you're very seldom there and you had no help. So those were the two kinds of things that really started to, I think, destroy what it looked like in my community. And I don't know about you. I'm just thrilled to know people that are going into library science because I look at them and go, why would you do that in this day and age? This is the most confusing vocation to select because I don't even know what it is anymore. But one of the kids in my book club, she got through her library degree and she's in public library down in Washington, D.C. Happy as can be. I think this is her second year there.
Mm.
So, people are finding spots and jobs.
I know that in school right now, the textbook we read talks a lot about being an information professional
Mm-hmm.
and that language, knowing that not all of us are going to be in a traditional library when we
Right.
finish. And that there are a lot of companies, for example, and industries that need the role of a librarian, but they wouldn't use that term necessarily.
Right. Yep.
So that's some part of what's going on top of everything else. And in California, for school libraries, the role of a teacher librarian, like an accredited teacher librarian, for example, has been a suggestion, but not a rule, and therefore has slipped a lot, I guess, to the point where a lot of districts maybe have one in the district,
Okay.
like it's become bad basically.
Right.
Like, so we might have a media specialist, an assistant type person who's able to be in the school library, but like and the other advocacy project that I've been working on is we're trying to get a bill passed that would have a library lead, so like somebody who would sit in important meetings and be like, this is what school libraries need, and like advocate for us basically.
Mm-hmm.
And make it so that teacher librarians and such are more of a requirement and not a suggestion, so that they have to budget in for it and all of that. I'm not even going into school libraries, at least not right now, but it is something that I'm aware of.
And exactly what you said is how I started in the 70s, and that's how I ended. We had a superintendent that came in and said, I'm not saying to do this, but he suggested at a principals meeting of all of these principals, if you need additional staffing, you could swap out your librarian for a classroom teacher. And that's what principals wanted. They needed somebody who was responsible for 25, 30 kids. They had no idea what the librarian did. I had one principal who did, and he got an education using a library because that's how he learned. He knew the value of it. I would talk to teachers and say, well, didn't you ever use the library in college? No. Why did I need that? So I also knew these were certified teachers who had never used the library. So why would I expect them to use a library with what they were teaching? Because they never used the library. And most of our principals had no clue whatsoever. On the other hand, though, when I started, we had libraries that I wouldn't want to go in them. They were mean, they were nasty, they were not user friendly, they were always closed. And over time, it changed a little bit. And some of those people we sort of got rid of. But their thing was, my shelves are neat, everything is in order, and it's quiet. And that's that very traditional stereotype was what a lot of how they were running their libraries. So that was never anything that really got somebody wanting to keep those positions. And we also had several who ended up having to teach like half and half. Maybe they taught biology because that was their background before library. Our elementary librarians have full curriculum. They teach every kid and grade. They're the teacher's planning period. So the teacher drops them off, becomes the librarian's job, whatever the curriculum is set for them. That's what they do. Give out the assignments. They grade the assignments. There's a library grade on the report cards. I would never be an elementary librarian because that's crazy. That is totally scripted. This is what you have to do. There is no wiggle room. At least my system, middle and high, it was very flexible. You created and you could work with. So that was the other piece when you look at it. So elementary librarians, they did not want to get rid of because they were teachers. They were planning periods.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's funny what you talked about, because when I graduated, my very good friend who also graduated got a job, and I think it was with GE, as a researcher. She said they needed somebody, they didn't have a library, but they needed someone to do the research. And I think she had permission to use some of the research libraries in the Philadelphia area. And it's funny that you said those are still out there, because you'd almost think everybody's got access to a computer. You can buy a database that's that specific. Anybody can key in and find this stuff. So it's interesting that they're still doing that. They're still hiring that person to do that research for them.
Like, I've spoken to someone who's a pharmaceutical librarian. So she works at a massive company. But basically people will be like, I need this information, or I need to know about the copyright on this thing. So her job is a totally virtual position. So she just handles people's stuff depending on deadlines so that they have the information that they need, I guess, and are able to move forward with getting things patented at their company and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But,
and I remember where I went to undergraduate, I also did my library degree. They had a law school, and I thought, well, that'd be really cool, until they told me you need a law degree to be a law librarian.
yes.
Really,
Yes.
if I was going to get a law degree, I don't think I'd want to be the librarian. But I thought, okay, well, that's not a special library I'm going to enter into.
What's annoying to me, because I'm in the beginning of my job hunting process, so like I will look and I'll see something that says, oh, an instructional librarian, and then I click on it and it's like at a law library, and I'm like, just put law librarian and like, because every time you need a JD, and I'm like, that is not just something all of us have on the like.
And I'll tell you, even though I made my last few years sound awful, I would never have traded 1 year. I loved my job. I mean, I got up, I loved going to work. I loved hanging out with teenagers, as wacky as they are. And I realized I was a people person, and I could not do a desk. I could not do a routine every single day. My routine was, I knew what time I had to get there. I had no idea when I was going to leave, because I just stayed until whenever. And once you walk through the door, you had no idea what was going to happen, because that's just the nature of high school and teenagers and a school thing. And that, to me, was just so much fun, the interaction with kids, knowing you may have made a difference and never know. So I did not like working like in the college library, because I sat in the back and cataloged. I needed people. I needed that interaction. And that's what I just realized. For me, I had to find that library spot where I interacted with humans, and I really like the kids. You may find something entirely different. So that's how I finally decided what world of library, because I figured I'd go into a special library. Just realized, no, it's not. I love the library job, but I need to love it with people. And that was when I realized, crazy or not, it's the school. I'll go back and get certified. I loved my 40 years. Even on a bad day, I loved it. So that's what you want. You want to find something that you just love, getting up in the morning and going. Or if you're doing the night shift, you'd like going out at the night shift. Yeah.
Because like my friend, we're like going to help each other look for work together. And we have such opposite ideal work environments. It's kind of funny. She's like, put me in the back with an archive so I don't have to interact with anybody. And I'm like, oh, well, that's good that you know that. It's just so funny to me. I'm like, I want to feel like I'm helping somebody in some capacity. So it's like, it all helps, but it's good to know what environment is better for you. So.
And sometimes, like I said, you only find that out by taking the first job that you have and say, well, it's a job. It'll give me experience in realizing what you like and what you don't like and what you really would make you happy. And like I said, and I learned so much at the college library, but I just realized that just was, and I have to tell you, I am such a stickler for detail. I was one of those people when the school was closed at winter time, during winter break. I loved going in, reading the shelves and in Library of Congress classification. I mean, no one would say it, but it was just so much fun. I found all the little mistakes. I thought, oh God, help me, what am I doing? But that was one of that attention to detail And I think that's one of the reasons why I went into it. That,
Mm.
it was logical, it made sense. And then I realized that was fine, but I also needed the people part of it. Well, something about being optimistic and all. One of the things, and I
Oh
think we
yeah.
sort of covered it, what really makes me happy is to see people are now fighting back, where people could just go before and complain and sneak things through. People are standing up, people are beginning to question. So I keep thinking, as long as two sides are now, even if they're clashing, we hear both sides. And for me, I think the real role of any kind of a library person now is really to be a defender of books and reading. I think about how I fought to get kids what they needed. And if I knew I couldn't in my position, I wanted to make sure, like I said to you, public library, I wanted to make sure there was a way they could have access. And part of my job was saying, I don't have it here, but I just checked the library has it across the street. And so to me, just doing what we can, and even if it has to be under the radar, my attitude always was I pushed for kids and instruction up until the point of getting myself fired. Came close a couple of times because I always took what was best for kids over what was best for an administrator. So that to me is the fight. And I think if librarians, regardless at what level, keep fighting for the freedom of words, I think we're frontline and nobody really knows that yet because they don't know what we do.
Yeah.
But those are the two things I'm just thinking, that communities are now fighting back. We also have a voice, but also if librarians do those things that keep pushing reading, keep pushing and defending books, we're going to be good.
We talk about the difference between bad actors and people who genuinely just don't know what's going on.
Yep.
And people who say like, oh, why do we need a library? Or why do we need a librarian? When anybody can go get a book or whatever. And it's like, people don't really have any idea of all the different things, like you're
Right.
saying, that people
And
do.
I'll tell you what I have read over the last couple of years, some historical fiction, and I'm trying to remember, was it the Paris librarian? There were a couple that they were set in World War II. And what I found so fascinating, they were all trying to save the books, save the library. I'm thinking people died to protect the written word, to protect that stuff. And that was back in the 40s, long before we have what we have today. And I thought in the midst of a world war, the written word was one of the most valuable things that people wanted to keep safe or to keep getting out into the hands of people, even though they had to do this again under the guise of delivering food or however they could get books to people. So I just thought libraries have been really important and valuable and movers and shakers in times of need. And, I don't think it's going to be any different today, but it's going to take people like you, people coming through the system now to be those true defenders and fighters. I've retired, I'll still fight and I still hang out with a bunch of retired librarians and we're still mouthy. We still read and we still do that. But I think it's the younger folks that are coming into the positions or creating positions or that advocacy in any way, shape or form. Or, that TikTok kind of thing, whatever you can do to get it out there. But where people live and breathe today and how messaging is given. And that's to me the role of the new librarian. Go where the people are, go where they're listening, go where they're hearing, and keep books alive and keep reading. I don't care what you read, how you read it, just keep reading and having discussions. Have your little neighborhood book club, get the little kids to read. And this indie library, like I said, it is very, very tiny. And one of the things that she does is book clubs for every single age. And it is the cutest thing. She has graphic novel book club. She has a teenage book club. She's got the whatever I like animal book. She has kids coming together in her little store for book club. Usually she has a guest reader on Saturday mornings. It could be one of the elementary librarians. It could be one of the teachers from the elementary school that come as guest readers. She is just showing, even though it's a bookstore, she's just showing the value of that written word to every age group. That's my third book club that I joined because why not? But she literally has book clubs and encourages book clubs. Is sort of stuck trying to figure out how to get teenage book clubs because maybe two people show, if even that. But I just thought, isn't that interesting that even a bookstore is trying to get the reading the way a school would or a community should? So there's a lot of partners out there for librarians to reach out to or to work with. And these indie bookstores are really, to me, that's almost like a library because they're giving people what they want. They're giving them community spaces. They're giving them programs that libraries do and used to do and inviting libraries in to be part of their community. So that would be another thing I'd say, if the kinds of stuff that you said that you're interested in, that outreach, it may be an outreach through an indie bookstore that from your library perspective, going, hey, have you ever thought of, or just to start building that community of readers. Like I said, it's the coolest thing. And I tell the whole world about it. It's just one of the coolest things I've ever seen opening during COVID. And she's expanded into 2 separate areas where she's now going to have a wine and coffee bar right next to her at the bookstore where you can just sort of go in with your book and have something to drink. And then her literacy lab has moved upstairs where it's another community space where if it's a small wedding, if you've got a party, that's where she does her author kinds of things, that she has been that successful in 2 years' time because of her way of marketing, reading, and books. So that's a bookstore person. You're a library person.